Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Open to Export webinar about the opportunities and challenges of exporting to India. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I am a Senior Content Editor at the Institute of Export and International Trade. Open to Export is a free online service helping small businesses get ready to sell overseas through our step-by-step articles and guides, regular webinars, our Export Action Plan tool, and our quarterly competitions. You can find out about all of these on our website at www.opentoexport.com. Open to Export is powered by the Institute of Export and International Trade, the UK's professional membership body for traders. Endorsed by the World Trade Organization and the International Chamber of Commerce, as a small business champion, we offer a unique range of individual and business membership benefits, education and training catering for beginners through to master's degrees, and an always exciting and prestigious programme of events celebrating UK businesses' exporting achievements. We will be running a live Q&A later in the session, and you can ask questions at any point during the question using the question box on the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. The general principle here is that we'll ask questions that are relevant to the broader audience, so you won't be able to go into company specifics as such, but if you do have specific questions, we can refer you to our technical helpline afterwards. I am delighted to be able to hand you over to Ajay Sethi from Ajay and Associates, who has vast experience of supporting businesses trading into and in India. But over to you, Ajay.
Thank you, William. So the way we are going to run this presentation is that we are dividing it into the economic part of what is India's story been and what is India looking exciting for. I will then move into what has been the way the Indian government has tried to increase foreign direct investment into India. Then I'll briefly touch upon what are the opportunity sectors, and then finally I will run through what are the areas in which we feel the government could do something better. And of course, I could briefly touch upon how to go about setting up structures in India, given the time duration. So next slide, please. And we can move on to the next one. So this is the slide which I really just wanted to briefly touch upon. Where does foreign direct investments come into India from? So if you see the names on the top of the slide, it's Mauritius, Singapore, and then if you jump down to number 5, that is also Netherlands. These are primarily routing mechanisms or routing jurisdictions for bringing investments into India. So I really do not count them as investments per se. So if you look at it, number 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9, these are your main investing companies into the countries into India. And I've seen that UK has been consistently sitting amongst the top 5, primarily on account of financial services and of course good bodies like JCB and Rolls-Royce and BAE Systems. So UK has been focusing on the manufacturing side for long, but of late we have seen the interest moving into fintech, technology, and other areas as well. Next slide, please. Now, foreign direct investment, I just thought this would be an interesting chart to just mull over the fact how foreign direct investments are coming into India. Now, when I started I got into the profession and I had joined one of the big 5 then. That time this chart used to look very, very different. 50% of the chart was covered by automotive, 30% was covered by software side, and the balance was 1 or 2%. It gives me great pleasure to see the chart is very well divided, which means most of the industries in India are maturing and are attracting foreign direct investments. I see automotive, which at one time used to even sit at 25 to 30%, now sitting at a balanced 5%. Of course, BFSI, financial services, and telecom sector and computer segment still leads. But the balance is very good, which shows India as a foreign direct invest market is maturing up. Next, please. Also worthwhile to see what our trading equations with the world is. So you see that while we are sending out a lot of goods to US is obviously unhappy, not just with us, but I think with many people, but with us too, because what we are importing from them is virtually half. China, on the other hand, is on the flip side, while we are sending to them, we are, of course, they are still our main exporting partners, so we are exporting to them quite a bit. What we are importing from them is about 6 times. Of course, that is no new story for anyone in the world, but it's a worthwhile thing to note. On the import side, you'll also see Switzerland. So while obviously you might think that we Indians must be consuming a lot of chocolates and watches and such things, the truth is Indians love gold also. And the maximum gold is coming from Switzerland. So that's why you see Switzerland on the import side. Next, please. And that, I mean, is some statistics about India and UK relationships and how it is faring as a relationship. One of the interesting things is that it's not just the British companies which have been investing into India, which is about 270. It's worthwhile to note that there are Indian businesses also moving towards UK. And I do not think that the outcome of political, geopolitical and Europe-UK relationships will have much bearing on India-UK trade movement or investment movements. So you see that it shows 842 Indian businesses which operate in India, but if you look at the number of people it caters to and the jobs it creates, obviously it must be mid-segments and small segments. If I was to be looking from an angle of a British consultant, I would say this is a good sign, because when SMEs start moving into a country, that means that they're accepting the market as a easy zone or an acceptable zone. So this, from my point of view, is a good thing, because we in India are still waiting for the SME segment from countries like Japan to start investing into India in a major way. That's why I think the India-UK relationship is quite matured. And because I have been looking at some of the investments, and JCB, the model of JCB has become a case study now for many India-UK investments on how they Indianized and how they actually went about winning the market, and there goes without saying they are leaders in the space now. Again, Marks and Spencer is another great example of, in spite of regulatory restrictions, how they went about totally kosher, totally clear of building up an investment base in India. And of course now it's a household name, and many Indians probably would not even be aware that Marks and Spencer is not an Indian brand but a British brand. So that's, I mean, how it shows that British companies deeply embed themselves into the system. I'll move on to the next one. So this next few slides will really talk about what is the way we have tried to make doing business in India easier, and also talk about what is the government's agenda on inclusive growth. I will try to go a little faster out here, but if there are any interesting questions you might want to raise on this, I would be very happy to take towards the end. Next, please. One of the biggest agendas which the government had when it came into power 5 years back, and as many of you may be aware, we are having the biggest election circus going on in India right now, which will give the results out on 23rd, and the new government will come in. Whether the new government comes in or the old government stays in power, the fact is routing corruption has become a big issue. So what did the earlier government try to do? They did demonetization, a very big talked about thing all over the world, in which currency one night, the big notes of currency were banned, which were to be replaced by new notes. And the government's whole idea was that people who indulge in corruption use bigger notes to store money. Was it success? Was it failure? It's a big economic question and a debate which can go on. The only thing I can do is that I can mention as a consultant is that there is definitely some level of stress on people who like to hoard currency. And the government has done the second thing besides demonetization as it walks along, is trying to replace. Earlier, the bigger currency notes were 80% of the entire money in circulation. The government target is to bring it down to world standards of 20 to 30. I think they've already managed up to 50%, which is a good way to control corruption. Demonetization being good and bad is a very debatable issue, so I'll stay away from that. GST, on the other hand, is a great game changer. Now, why, you would ask me that why would GST help to control corruption? You have to be in a developing country like India where people use every mechanism to evade taxes. People who, let's say there is a person who's buying a raw product and then selling out a final product to the retail segment. In between, there are various stages of conversion of the initial raw material into different sorts of products before it reaches final shape. If a person has paid GST, it is possible to track at every point a change takes place. And any person in the center of the transaction who does not pay GST gets flagged that he's avoided GST payment, which also means he's not trying to show his sales properly. Therefore, it is a way for the government to track people who normally evade taxes. And this is the way the government wants to control that. And I think it's a very powerful thing. A very large Indian software company has made the backbone for this GST network. And that backbone also has the ability to flag to the government those people who are regularly evading or not paying GST. So the backbone is quite strong. Direct benefit transfer is another great scheme because a lot of payments which the government was doing for the welfare was subsidized. Subsidized means the government was sending money out and the money would land up in the wrong hands. And this transfer through subsidy method was a failed method. It's been discussed very much all over the world, and the idea of direct benefit transfer, which means transfer money to the accounts of the poor so they could use the money directly for their own benefit. It has taken off, and I must say this is one of the things I'm very proud of, and this is one of the models many countries who are giving aid to Africa now are looking into this model and saying that this is worthwhile copying. Technology is another one. I'll come more to that later. Next slide, please. Inclusive growth is another segment. As you well know, India is a developing country. We are doing pretty well, but still we are on the developing side. There's much more to be done. And I'm very happy that the current government as well as the erstwhile government have been paying attention to infrastructure needs. Out of the ones which have the headings you see on the top, I think the ones which have done tremendous amount of work is roads and highways. We have seen very, very good development there. The minister in charge of that went all out to ensure that this segment picked up, and of course it created a lot of employment. The other one was the metro. I think that's another phenomenal thing besides covering a lot of metro tracks. The good thing also which has happened is these projects have been closing on time across India. Now that's something which many of you who have India experience would understand is somewhat rare. I think this phenomena repeating itself in other areas would be nice because railways is behind track, and I would love to see more impact on railways. Power is another area where the government does say that it's achieved 100% electricity in all the villages. That's technically true because there is a wire reaching a village and a couple of houses are getting electricity, but the entire village may not have benefited. But having said that, it's also fair to give credit that earlier 30% of the villages were not receiving it. So at least the start is made, and I think in the next 4 to 5 years, better electrification would happen. Renewable energy is another area like railways which needs far more attention than it's presently getting, and I'm hoping the government gets serious because we have seen sparks of real seriousness from the government on this particular side. Next, please. This is the much touted India's ease of doing business chart. We were happily sitting at a number of 140 earlier before the current government took over, and then we have gone ahead and merrily reached a position of 77. There's a lot of hard work which has gone behind it to ensure that things are sorted out. Now, while a lot of economists and people who like to criticize this effort, they talk about the fact that the gap in understanding of ease of doing business is that ease of doing business is based on futuristic projection of what the government will do, whereas actual ground realities are different. I do beg to differ on these issues because the fact of the matter is that there is many efforts which the government has gone on to ground zero to understand what actually troubles the foreign direct investment. I see these rankings will go down further. The benefit is not just to foreign direct investments. In the last few years, I've also seen citizens' issues have been tackled. The government has been making all-out effort for minimum interface, direct face-to-face interface with government bodies, so that you do maximum work through digitalization, which A, controls corruption, and B, there's a time-barred issue in which the matter has to be sorted out. I'm personally a beneficiary of such efforts of the government, So I do think this is a step in the right direction. Next, please. So somehow I thought it's always good to understand when we talk about ease of doing business, really what things came out. So good examples talk for themselves. One of the laws which I think needed to come into play was goods and service tax. We had 17 different laws handling movement of goods and services. There was a service tax, there was an excise duty, there was manufacturing. I mean, the list was rather long. And each one sitting on top another and crisscrossing. And it was confusing. So like many countries, we needed GST. Since its inception of the idea to actual implementation, it virtually took about 15 to 17 years. Actually, at many seminars, I've stopped answering the question that when do you think GST would come? Because I always would, as a great optimistic mention, probably next year or next to next year. And actually, I became older and GST never came. So GST, of course, is a new law now. The good thing about GST is, let's start by saying what's the bad thing about GST. GST is, in the current form, quite complicated, has four slabs to deal with, and it's also got an e-way bill. So there are complications, but it's about 2 years old. And the government is hell-bent upon ensuring that it simplifies it and makes it easier. So like any country, I do expect GST to take about 3 to 5 years to settle in. I also would like to give the entire credit to the current government because the GST was formulated by the earlier government, and therefore I think it's a very good joint effort, though both parties would like to take individual claim to fame for this one. So that's GST for you. I think GST will give us far more than just resolving a simple law. It will also help me to control corruption, which I mentioned to you earlier. Expect better implementation and cleaner version of this GST law in the next 1 to 1.5 years. Next, please. The other great law which I think was waiting to come into play was the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Act, IBC as it's popularly called in India. Now, this particular law consolidated 6 laws. Earlier there was this, if a company was actually going bankrupt, there were various bodies one could go to, and it was quite a mishmash. One of the biggest changes which has come into the new law is that this law takes the power away from the debtors and puts it into the hands of the creditors. This is a huge change from the erstwhile law, because now the creditors who are not getting their dues up, and they have to have a threshold limit of what is the amount we are talking about. If they are not getting that amount, they can go to the National Tribunal, which is specifically set up for insolvency and bankruptcy, and lay a claim that the company be liquidated and claims be paid. So not only is it a body to handle bankruptcy, it's also a methodology by virtue of which companies not receiving their dues from Indian companies can actually press for recovery. We have seen a lot of that happening. The good thing is this is a time-bound activity. It has to finish within 1 year, and if it's a revival within 6 months. And if you are just a simple company which wants to shut down, so let's say you set up operations in India and you decided you want to exit India. And if your company is a small company with no liability sitting on its balance sheets, then you could do it with fast track within 90 days. Trust me, this probably is the biggest change, because earlier it was a court-driven process and it could take up to 5 to 9 years. Please do mark my words, I did say years and I didn't say months. And now to hear it in 90 days and having seen one of my clients finishing it is good. What lacks in this particular law is the fact that this law is not got all the teeth it deserves. Some of the issues which are up before the tribunal have ended up in courts for more clarity on the law. I expect this law to get into full flow in next 12 to 18 months, when all the ticklish issues would be handled and no issues of law would remain, and this law would simply flow issues which are raised by creditors and directly close these issues. Next, please. The other one good interesting law was the Real Estate Regulatory Act. I don't know whether you will believe me or not, but the Real Estate Regulatory Act is a much needed law. Imagine a country like India with more than 1 billion people, and everybody who's obsessed with buying houses, buying house is a big thing in India because staying on rent is not regarded as satisfactory by the old Indian systems. So given the fact that there's a lot of real estate development which happens in India, and to know that there is no real estate regulatory law up till about 2-3 years back is a surprise by itself for many of you. But this law lacks the adequate teeth. Though of course it gives a lot of power, it says what the builder can do, cannot do, how much money he has to put in an escrow account and not therefore take out the money for using on another project. Things which you are already used to in developed countries was not happening here, has been put into play. However, the states of India have to take it up in more earnest than it's presently being done. And I do think this is a step in the right direction because now I see real estate developers, they give great heed to this fact. And they are no more talking about growth numbers in 2 digits and thinking about how to use the money for different means. They are serious about it. So real estate segment will develop in a very matured manner, and I am already seeing the signs. And we have seen many clients who have real estate clients who have come on board. They actually are looking for good, cautious advice on how to build business better rather than planning things which are directed and could even end up in direction of evasion. I assure you, none of such people are my clients. Next, please. It's worthwhile to then just talk about a little bit about the opportunities. Now, given the fact that I've taken you through what India is attracting foreign direct investments, what are the segments we play, which countries are looking at India, and what the government intent is, I'll just briefly step into opportunities. Next, please. This is why India remains a favorite. I normally, given the fact that most of the people worldwide now understand the Indian market and what India is doing. So generally just talking about GDP growth and all probably is not required for many of you. But I can definitely tell you that some of the largest players in the world and some of the largest consultancy like McKinsey, Bloomberg, Bain, they are still projecting India as a hot market to be in. I do concur with them because I think the fundamentals are absolutely in place. But what is far more interesting from my viewpoint is what I'm going to show you next. Next slide, please. The fact of the matter is, and this is a report done by Bloomberg, Brooklyn's report. So this report will tell you, and I'm putting the summary out here, how the middle class population of the world is building up. So from 2015 when we were 3 billion and to 2030 when we'll be 5.4 billion, the chunk sitting in Asia in 2015 was 46%. So you see the small left-hand side, you see the small little chart, and you see the 46% pie which is there. That was Asia. In 2020, which is as good as next year, the Asia pie will become 54%. Alongside, keep a look on the fact that how the other ones are reducing simultaneously. This is based on purchasing power parity. I'm not talking money-to-money basis. But you see, it increases to 44% as you go along. And then comes the more interesting part. You see in 2030, the pie in Asia becomes 65%. This is something which cannot be ignored because this is something which is really going to drive consumption patterns and movement of companies to different paths. And I think Asia is going to continue to see this action. US trade wars with China are an indication because they understand with worry that where the movement of goods and consumption will happen. And this is bound to happen. These trade wars will result in give and takes. But ultimately, you cannot change the fact consumption is going to be happening in Asia. I'm going on to the next slide, please. And there you see how the consumption, because the middle class is increasing, the consumption also, and you see those standards, the projections. So if you look at the American chart first, the North American chart, the orange building which you see is the one of 2050, and the light blue one you see is of 2030 projection. You see how it drops down in America, you see how it drops down in Europe, and you see in Asia Pacific is increasing. If you want more statistics, then the fact is that 2015 US was the leading consumer followed by China, Japan, and India. And by 2030, it will be China, which will be number one. Virtually 22% of the middle class consumption will be by China, followed by India, then US and Indonesia. Japan disappears out of the chart in 2030. Now, whether these projections will play out or not is not important. The fact is, these indicators are very clear. So in 57% of the global middle class will be consuming or not, can be 55%, could be 50%, could be 60%. The bottom line is there will be mass consumption. And therefore, ignoring Asia and specifically India, which has just started the consumption pattern, would not be a good planning move for those who are looking at global markets. Next, please. Again, just a little bit of an opportunity, given that the middle class I'm talking about. There's another opportunity which I would love to talk about, which is that the freight corridors. So you see on this chart, you see two Indias. The India on the right side, which you see, has got these colored pathways marking crisscrossing across India. These are the freight corridors. The yellow one, which is running, is the corridor running from Kolkata all the way to the north side in Amritsar. Then there's the orange one running from Delhi to Mumbai. And from Mumbai down to Bangalore is the green one. And then there's this tiny purple one running from Chennai to Bangalore. Now these are, some of them is work in progress, some of them are in the process of building up. And then you have the waterways, which are marked as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This freight corridor and these inland waterways, this project, if it reaches culmination, which will of course be far away, is presently the largest infrastructure project being undertaken on earth. Of course, there are opportunities. There are warehouses being created. There's tracking being created. This is for simply moving goods across India. Now imagine if you are a person sitting in Southeast Asia and you have an efficient freight corridor in India through which you could move your goods for domestic supply and then send it across all the way to the western side, where let's say you're in Mumbai or Gujarat, and use that base to supply goods to Africa. The cost efficiency on transportation is quite phenomenal to be noted out here. So these freight corridors, besides adding domestic value, could add great value to companies which look towards India as an efficient base for future supplies to Africa, which is the next market which will grow in the next 5 to 15 years. So do pay attention to the fact that these industrial corridors and the opportunities on the way or around these industrial corridors cannot be ignored. Next, please. I just put in some of the sectors where I do feel opportunities are going very high in India. Automotive still remains high, and this huge sounds the government is making about electrical vehicle it keeps automotive in the centerfold. Food processing is another big one. Healthcare will be a big one. Real estate, for reasons I just mentioned, and then of course hospitality is another one which is growing. The other sector which I expect action to suddenly pick up is retail, because slowly the retail segment is opening up. I do see the Amazons and other making money, but now we are getting the whiff of things as we see some of the Indian players who had set up large malls or departmental stores, a chain of them, now slowly inching towards cozy relationship with Amazons and such, because as we see in the future, some of these large giants who are presently only in the virtual world will set up brick and mortar base also. So we are seeing some action and we are seeing some traction, and we have been hearing rumors about Amazon talking to some of the Indian players, and as and when the sector opens up, they might be complete marriages. So this sector, which not is just talking about retail, but would bring in fold those companies which are giving goods and services to the retail segment, specifically services, could also come in play. An area where I believe UK has great strength, which is to do with windows and directions and other things relating to services provided to the retail segment. So I'm just giving you one of the areas around that. Next, please. Of course, nothing comes without a cost, and there are challenges. GST is a challenge. Some of the laws need to be tightened up, have to be given more strength. Industrial corridor, the government really has to push it far more than it's pushing it. And I think labor laws is something which I just cannot say is as comfortable as anywhere else. It could be very bureaucratic, it's a bit slow, but hopefully the government will keep on making an effort to tackle it. But right now, as I speak to you, labor laws could be trying for those of you who run large industrial plants. All you need is, of course, a good manager to manage labor, and that's where good money spent would ensure continuity. Having said that, the likes of JCBs, Rolls-Royce, Bombardiers, and all have been successfully running in India, and none of these names have had labor issues because they have managed these labor issues quite well. Next, please. So now that I'm moving towards the tail end of my presentation, from here we could get into questions, but it will be worthwhile just to briefly touch upon what are the way you can come into India. Next, please. So a foreign corporate and a British corporate looking towards India, there are three buckets through which you could look into India. You could say we would not like to presently jump into India, and therefore we would like to do a little bit of a test. So that's on the extreme right. You might say, listen, nothing to do with setting up anything. Let me simply set up a distribution channel. So therefore, I would like to set up an agent in India or give a franchise arrangement, and that should be enough to see whether my product is acceptable to India or not. So that's one way to do it. Or you move to the extreme left, where you see that you might end up setting up a liaison office, also called a representative office, in which you come and you find out about the market by doing surveys, research, or you could be supplying to an importer, which is we talked about on the right-hand side. So you're supplying to a franchisee or an agent, but you set up a liaison office alongside to see and study the market of how your goods are moving. So you collect the information. Branch office and project office are for infrastructure projects, and they are only for the purpose of, let's say you got a road project in India, so you set up, you're doing the road project, duration of which you set up what is a project office. When the project ends, project office shuts down. However, if you're looking for a more concrete way of doing business, you could set up a wholly owned subsidiary or limited liability partnership. Both are regulatory structures. Or you could choose to go with a partner, an Indian partner. While there is no compulsion or regulatory need to go with a partner, it is useful to go consider a partner when you are specifically having contracts, infrastructure contracts or labor management is an issue, because the local know-how helps in these particular matters. So therefore, joint venture partner is not a necessity, but it's very useful depending on certain segments. And if you're looking at sales and distribution networks, again, a partner who already understands sales and distribution, which is one of India's big issues out here, because India has a supply management problem, it could be a very useful thing to have a partner. Having said that, there is no restriction for you to go for a wholly owned subsidiary. Most of the segments of the sectors are completely open for automatic investments with limited interface or approvals required from the government. There are only about 5 or 6 segments which I don't think any of you would be interested, like setting up a post office or atomic research and such other restricted areas. Next, please. Having looked at the entities which you could possibly create, this gives you a bird's eye view, which you could later delve into deeper. And of course, we would very much welcome to discuss what structures would be optimal with you if you ever decide to set up in India. But this gives you a bird's eye view of how much time it takes, what kind of taxes which come to play upon you, and what is the kind of control which comes up. In a nutshell, it's far more easier now to set up or to shut down without getting into specifics. More or less, within a period of 4 weeks, a company can be set up, and also depending on the kind of structure you have, you could shut it down. Company setup, which is, I told you earlier, could take an unending amount of time, is also falls within a period of months. So therefore, entity is a question of what your needs are, which would be depending upon your product and the kind of market share you're looking at and the markets you're entering, and what kind of needs do you have with a partner. And that is what this entry comparison is all about. This is a bit boring kind of a chart, and therefore I will not dwell deeper, but you are very welcome to later on interact and ask us more questions to help you decide what structure works best. Next, please. And that's the end of my slides. I am just, as is the norm, now that I have addressed you, I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight about our company. We have been successfully helping foreign companies set up businesses in India and manage their regulatory compliances in India. We've been in business for about 30 years now, and we have dealt with some of the top companies in the world in the mid segment as well. and we are positioned amongst India's top 10. We have 700 people across India and a large client base. Many of them are Fortune 500 companies, and most of the Big Four know us very well. Actually, we are also auditors to one of the Big Four in India, which speaks volumes about where we stand as we talk to you. So anything to do with India entry strategy and regulatory compliances, accounting, payrolls, taxes is what we do, and we would be delighted if we could add value to your operations or planned operations in India. With that, I have finished my presentation, and I'm very, very happy to take up any questions which you would like to come across to me.
Great. Thank you so much, Ajay, for such a comprehensive guide to doing business in India there. A lot of information, and I hope everyone has found that useful. So, as Ajay has mentioned, we're now going to open the floor for questions, and you can ask questions using the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. Right, so Ajay, one of the questions I wanted to ask is a lot of the audience today will be smaller businesses who will look to probably enter India using distributors or sales agents or kind of business partners out there. How would you, what ways are there for small businesses in the UK to meet potential business partners in India?
I think the best way to go about doing it is, see, one is you will have to, it's no point directly touching base with consultants. I mean, at the cost of running myself down. The best way to do is through trade chambers and bodies. One could, even now that the Indian High Commission has started a program called AIP, Access India Program, that could be one possibility. And other would be trade chambers which are directly interacting with India. And of course, I think your Institute of Export would also have connections, I'm assuming, with Indian exporters who are looking or Indian importers who are looking to tie up. So I think running through trade chambers would be far more efficient to start with than anything else.
Great, thank you. In terms of the Institute, we do have a guide, a Doing Business in India guide, which has a lot of useful contacts in there. So if anyone is interested, we can try and get one of those across to you. One of the questions we've had in is from Ramesh, and he asks, do we need a PAN number to export to India? Is there a double tax treaty with India?
Okay, so PAN is what is called a permanent account number, which you require for tax purposes. Now, if you are exporting goods to India, you don't require, I mean, if you're exporting goods and you have no dealing with India, you don't require a permanent account number. However, if there are going to be subsequent services attached to those goods, then you would naturally fall within the ambit of Indian taxes, and therefore permanent account number would be required. So that's the first question. And India does have a double tax treaty with UK. India has treaty with most of the countries in the world. I think we have 91 treaties, if I remember it correctly. And that helps you to plan which base the taxation would be paid. Now that's a complex issue, and we can get in separately if somebody asks it. But to answer the question, PAN is not required for purposes of exports. It is required if services are attached to the goods which are coming in. And India does have a double tax agreement, double tax avoidance agreement as it's called, with UK.
Great, thank you. And we just had a message in from David in response to the first question, who says that there are local DIT trade advisors throughout the UK who can assist in finding contacts. So thank you for that, David. Another question we had in from Lindsay, which is, what is the process for setting up a customs warehouse in India, and what are the regulations?
Earlier, just to clarify that earlier there was this concept, which is a dying concept of a special economic zone or export-oriented unit, which was much in fad. I'm assuming we are not even talking about that, so we'll just stick to the issue about customs warehouse. Basically, you really require is a licensed custom agent. Once you have a licensed custom agent on board, rest of the process is regulatory, like the one I had shown you about India entry. You set up a company, you get the company registered with the registrar of companies, you open your bank accounts, you pay accountants like me, you get your tax issue sorted out. That's all routine. The only specific thing you require is a licensed custom agent who takes the responsibility of liaising with the government and certifying what moves in and out.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, just picking up on GST. So Tim asked in advance of the webinar, are commission payments and service fees automatically liable for the new Indian GST tax, and at what rate?
Okay, so commission now, in order to make you understand this question, let me break it down into two bits. Commissions could be of two kinds: when the agent is based outside India or the agent is based in India. If the agent is going to be based in India, he raises an invoice. Let's say there's a British company he's dealing with, and he gets his commission from the British company. Then he raises an invoice on the British company, and he will raise the GST as part of the billing. So, and that is 18%. Rate will be 18% in all my answers. So that's the first situation when the agent is based in India. Second situation is when the agent is not based in India. This further splits into two parts. One is when he is based outside India and he is dealing with a company which is based outside India, which may be supplying to India. In that case, the agent doesn't get into the ambit, and the commissions do not fall under the ambit of GST in India. However, the second situation is the agent is based outside of India, and the principal who's giving him the commission is based in India. In this situation, GST is applicable again at 18%, but this becomes a little complex, so I'll just try to explain it to you. The Indian company then is required to pay the GST on his behalf, and if the terms are such, collected from him, and then deposit to government treasury. This methodology is called reverse charge. So to answer your question and to put it in summary, agent in India, and he is the principal is also in India. No questions, it will be done. Second issue is the situation where the agent is outside and the company is also outside, no GST issue. And if the principal is in India and the agent is outside India, reverse charge mechanism to pay will come into play. The rate will be still 18%.
Thank you. We've had a couple of questions in regarding currency, and I guess people are generally asking how should people approach doing business in India in terms of what currency to use, or should they sell in rupees, or kind of what advice would you generally give in terms of currency?
So first of all, India is a exchange controlled regulation as we talk right now. It's not an open market. So therefore, if you are in Indian market itself, then the only currency which works is rupees, which means if you're going to bring foreign exchange into India, then your money gets converted into Indian rupees, and therefore the risk of the currency depreciating or losing value is always there. So that's the first answer. If you're coming from outside, if you are planning to bring in money and you have to hedge your risk, is there a methodology around that? I don't think an accountant can answer that like me, but that part is crystal clear. However, if you are bringing money to India and you need to, one is of course your capital investments into India, which is to do with buying assets and buying land and other things. The second part is you're bringing in money and you need working capital. Earlier this was not allowed, but now it is allowed to be brought in, and the limits are quite clear, and is called under what falls under ECB. India loves these abbreviations, which is external commercial borrowings, and that part is allowed for virtually everything except real estate, buying real estate in India. So currency, as you can understand very briefly from what I'm saying, is all about, it's a controlled regulation, so you will end up dealing with Indian rupees. But if you are a person who is selling into India and you have to receive your monies, you can directly demand in foreign currency, and the Indian party you're dealing with is obligated to fulfill it. It's all a question of negotiations, and you can get your money outside, or it sometimes happens part India and part outside.
Thank you, thank you. And one last question, because we're sort of starting to run out of questions. So, as you alluded to earlier, there's an election ongoing. Could you say a little bit more about the potential ramifications of the different potential outcomes of the election, as far as you can, of course?
So, economically speaking, because I think outcome could go either ways, but economically speaking, I personally have little doubt that either of the parties, or either of the large parties, would try to fool around with what has been happening under the law, under the commercial side. I think most of the good reforms as relating to doing business in India have already happened. The only one on the anvil is the Indian Income Tax Code, which is coming out, which should come out next year. Other than that, most of the reforms as far as changes of laws are concerned have happened. Ease of doing business, I think it will be foolhardiness on part of any party coming into power to reduce it or to make it difficult. So I don't suspect any change there. And finally, as far as efforts for inclusive growth are concerned, I think if I was to pick up the manifesto of either of the party and look at it, and if I remove the name of the party from the manifesto, I think I will be confused whose manifesto it is, because both of them have been promising inclusive growth and social upliftment. So in a nutshell, economically, I don't expect anything very different. And I do think that Congress, which has been in power earlier and has been doing a good job when they were here, most of the reforms that you see today happened under the chairmanship of the Congress. So I don't think I expect major economic upheavals of any kind from my viewpoint. And I do expect both the governments to chase corruption. So frankly speaking, I'm very neutral about which government comes in.
Very good, very good. Thank you. And on that note, I think it's probably time for us to wrap up. So thank you once again, Ajay, for the presentation and the answers there. That was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen.
Okay. So in terms of what's coming up from the Institute of Export and International Trade at the moment, many of you would have heard about the new export controls profession we've set up for people involved in controls and licenses. We ran a webinar on it last week. If you are involved in that line of work, this is a great opportunity to gain industry recognition, access continuing professional development, and get support from a network of fellow professionals. More information can be found on our website at export.org.uk/export controls, and we'd be delighted to tell you more about how you can get involved. The Institute continues to do a lot of work in professionalising skills and knowledge around international customs as well, and our customs pathway is an ideal way for you to become a recognised customs expert. It's a combination of one-day training courses that can be taken towards gaining a customs practitioner award. Grant funding from the government towards training provided by the Institute that enables you to complete customs declarations and other important trade processes has been extended to May 31st. But do hurry up now, because that's not that long far away now. So do apply for that if you're looking to prepare properly for Brexit. Some really important skills involved there. And the Institute is also taking its World Trade Summit programme to Belfast and Bristol this summer. For more information about all of this activity, please go to export.org.uk. In terms of webinars, we're continuing to go beyond the EU with a series of market introductions, including Latin America, the USA, and Africa. The next session will cover Latin America on the 16th of May, next Thursday, and you can find details about all of our webinars at opentoexport.com/webinars. As always, please do take our exit survey to let us know what you thought of today's webinar and to give us any suggestions for improvements or future topics. But for now, thank you and have a lovely weekend. Bye.